Welcome back, everyone. So glad to see you here. There is too much to talk about today. We can't possibly get through all of it, but we're going to jump in and do what we can. Father Merriman reminded me on my way in that we could have made Advent 7 weeks. I'm not sure that we would have had enough time to talk about everything we might want to talk about. But so welcome back. Welcome back to those who are joining us online and through our recording. Shall we dive right in?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if there was any particular themes that y'all felt like we didn't quite finish last week.
Yeah.
No, we can't do that. We'll never finish.
Well, where we kind of left off was with this idea of one of the things we left, I think, unfinished, is this idea of the White Witch's reign as being a place of sterility and joylessness, a sort of lifeless blank white page. And that the onset of the transformation is one that comes through sound, through the cacophony of the birds, and through and I love it in the cinematic depictions, because in the magic of movie making now you can get it, you can really get it, but the grass and then the flowers erupting through it. And you know, one of the things that Roland Williams talks about in his little reflection on Lewis is the way that kind of, if the witch's reign is sort of the metaphor of all that opposes or is not of God, and Aslan's reign is all that is of God, then Lewis has kind of inverted people's common conceptions of what it means. Because for many people, the idea is that religion and faith and life with God is like plain and simple and humdrum and homogeneous and boring. And that life outside is like a constant party and anything goes and freewheeling and fun. And what Lewis does is he takes that and flips it and makes the witch's reign sterile and Aslan's reign like this eruption of the senses. And I just think there's a real brilliance to that in the way that Lewis transforms, you know, which is why we flipped the scene this week.
There is, I don't know, am I mic'd?
You are.
Oh, okay. There are some just beautiful passages that appeal to the senses, and I can at least get one of my 3 pages out. Let's see, where is it? When Aslan is seen by Susan and Lucy to recover, they fear first of all she's a ghost, but then Susan sort of smells his breath and then it just erupts in descriptions of the spring coming and the flight that Aslan takes over the ground. It's just absolutely so beautiful. Through the woods. With the paws and the tail and the wind and the mane flapping. And it's so sensuous that it makes you wonder, well, my issue today will be reality and illusion and dream. And it's such a vivid dream when all the statues come back to life and you see them moving, and the metaphor of I forgot quite what it was to watch the body unthawing.
Paper in the fireplace.
Yes, yeah. So you're absolutely right. It gets very, very strongly sensual.
Yeah. Disney owns the rights to this. Disney is a co-producer, well, doesn't own the books, but owns the cinematic depiction. And I keep wishing Disney would turn the girls riding on Aslan's back, I wish they would turn that into an attraction at one of the parks, because that would be awesome. That would be an epic attraction.
I know how to raise more money for this church.
Yes.
I mean, no, it's just, right. When I teach Old Testament, and again, Jared and Alina know this. When I teach Old Testament, I have certain Heller's rules of reading, certain ways. Oh, Rebecca knows this too. Certain ways of reading that sort of open it, get a text that's very familiar with you to open it up. And one of the things is always pay attention to the first thing. That's the reason why last week I was like harping on chapter one. We're starting with chapter 11, and the very first line is the most important line in the whole section. Edmond, meanwhile, had been having a most disappointing time. Right? And I love that, right? Because what he wants is change. What he is wanting is hope. What he's wanting is something else. And it's just the same darn stuff, right? And when I think about in my own life, right? When tragedy strikes, right? When bad things happen, right? Yes, there's pain, and yes, there's heartache, and yes, there's all these other things. But the thing that really strikes me at my heart is unfulfilled hopes, disappointment, right? I mean, it's kind of a funny line, and it is, but it's actually the part and parcel of the witch's grain is just disappointment, because it never changes. It's death.
And just after that, there's this reminder that what he's craving is some Turkish delight, and she's not giving that to him. And that's part of the disappointment. But very, very quickly, they come upon this little party of creatures who are having some food, right? And it's not the bad magic food. It's the food that nourishes and sustains. So they come along, and there's at the foot of the tree, a merry party, a squirrel and his wife with their children, and two satyrs, and a dwarf, and an old dog fox. So you got to pause there and realize that the fox and the squirrels, and I'm going to point to Scott, who brought this to my attention. The fox and the squirrels are having dinner together. The fox is not having the squirrels, right? So the lion and the wolf have to lay down with the lamb. But he can't see what they're eating, but it smells lovely. It smells lovely, and he's starting to sort of wake up himself, right?
And he's been on that sled getting so coated in the snow. Remember that at some point he even stops bothering brushing it off because he's just so exhausted by it. The barrage of the sterility and the cold and the frigid and the numbness is so perpetual that he can't escape it. And then in this moment, he sees them and he can smell how good it is.
And it's in that journey, because it comes back to Bob's point earlier, right? In that journey, as they're going and going and going, this is on page 125. This lasted longer than I could, right? The narrator comes in. I don't know if you've noticed this, but the narrator comes in every once in a while, usually when things get really kind of scary, but this lasted longer than I could describe, even if I wrote pages and pages about it. But I will skip on to the time, which is kind of interesting, because when we're following the witch and Edmond sort of making a journey, it's like, oh my God, it's just boring. I'm just going to skip. But whenever Aslan makes a journey, it goes a whole page talking about, Lucy and Susan on his back, and just this liveliness.
For sure.
It's just beautiful.
So change was one of the themes last year in Christmas Carol. And when Scrooge wakes up, was it all a dream? Very sophisticated 20th century critics, Freudian in particular, decided that Scrooge just had a bipolar personality, and he'd returned to Scrooge the next day, and even located an illustration that seemed to show that. So it raises the question for us, and Dickens raised it in every one of the 5 Christmas stories, whether this alternate reality is a dream. And this story really complicates that, because at one point, Edmond is so unhappy in the castle that he's trying to believe that it's something else. And he's not sure, what the dream is. And I don't know that we ever really fully understand where reality lies in this world. It's because it's such a complicated world. It starts in World War II and goes to Narnia and goes back to the lamppost many, many years later. So what kinds of problematics about reality do you guys see in the last?
Well, I mean, even when they're talking to the professor at the first, right? Or, are there, I don't know the exact wording. Are there alternate worlds, all around us?
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing's more promised.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so whatever reality is, it's a lot more complicated than looking at it y'all.
Yeah,
So,
there's now-
no, but it's a complex thing.
Yeah.
And that's an ongoing theme throughout all 7 books of the series.
Yeah,
And it's encapsulated at the very end of the last book,
right.
when they are either on the outskirts of heaven or in a tumble down shack that looks hopeless.
Yeah.
And it's having the eyes to see what's in the imagination.
Yeah.
Let me, sorry.
Reality, sorry.
Let me just repeat that for those, we're getting comments that we're not repeating questions and comments. So the comment is this theme runs through the whole series and shows up especially in that final book where the center of activity is either this little shack or the outskirts of Narnia and passageway into the new Narnia. So just for those on
Yeah.
camera. Yeah.
Well, we were all so excited and now we're tongue-tied. I'll go back to my notes. Well, let me ask a question that I really don't have an answer to. And that, again, Rowan Williams talks a great deal about. What is happening when we have these battles? Is this a battle between right and wrong? Was the White Witch a part of the original settlement? And were all those awful creatures that she enlists in her side, were they part of the original settlement? There's never been human beings in this world. And that seems to me like a lot of the story of human beings taking over land that belong to ugly or useless or stagnant kind of. What did the American Indians do? They did the same thing every year. They farmed in the summer and we don't know what they did in the winter. Hunted buffalo, I suppose. So is it a revolution against the people that were there? Is it an overturning of an illegitimate regime? Is it a new reformation of the world? And I don't know how to unpack that.
The only thing I would say is that the Pevensies are unlikely to imperialize Narnia because they're siblings. And so we don't have any idea that there's like a new wave of humanity going to sweep over because it's just the 4 of them and their kin. And so like if there is this imperialist like hint, but also when you begin to unpack it, it's also like, well, how would that even work since they're brothers and sisters? And we have no hint that there are other humans following behind them. And actually at the end, when the professor is there and he's like, you can't get back in that way and you don't have any control over it anyway. And you won't even know where to find the next doorway anyway. So it's like, you don't have control over it. So there is like an imperialist and anti-imperialist thing all at the same time. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I guess I would say, I don't know what that Lewis is making a point with it, perhaps because it is kind of internally conflicted.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, and it's also internally conflicted. Maybe the conflict is the times in which it's written and the way the whole book begins is that we have World War II.
Yeah.
Back to chapter
Right?
1.
And that's kind of depends on how you look at it, right? Yeah. So.
Okay, so one of the themes.
Just
please.
one more thing, and that is talking about all of this war stuff. I just have this in my ogres with monstrous teeth and wolves and bull-headed men and spirits of evil trees and poisonous plants and other creatures whom I won't describe because if you see, there's the narrator again. If I did, the grown-ups would probably not let you read this book. Cruel, and then he does keep going. Cruel and hags and incubuses and wraiths and horrors and efreets and sprites and orkneys and wooses and ettins. In fact, there were all those who were on the witch's side and whom the wolf had summoned at her command. And I have written in my margin, but not Edmond, because he's been redeemed from her. So yeah, so again, for me at least, the whole listing of everybody that's on her side is in fact to emphasize, in fact, who's not on her side. So, yeah. So, anyway,
He can't be summoned.
that's right.
But they are animals, and you made the great point last week that this is a book that incorporates them as animals.
Yeah,
They're real participants.
It's a whole
But
realm
there are
of,
those other animals.
yeah.
too. And it troubles me in a way. I see so much of the 19th century, but that's the only century I really know anything about. So, but in Dickens's Life of Our Lord that he told to his children and then wrote, he has passage that would be kind of uncomfortable to us now, but he's telling his children, remember who Christ took care of. Okay, they were the poor and the outcasts. And he said, you know, don't make fun of anybody who's ugly or crippled, or they may be the persons that Christ will choose. And people who are very up to date now or woke may find this kind of condescending, but apparently in the 19th century, it's very necessary to remind people that there are not all beautiful people in the world, not all healthy, and that we need to love our neighbors, everyone. And that is missing here.
Yeah. So I want to come in on Edmond for a second.
Okay.
Because we get, in this last part, we get Edmond's redemption, but you don't get to hear the conversation.
No.
Which I love so much, because as much as we are witnesses to this story, we are not voyeurs to the internal life of someone else. And Lewis is making a conscious decision, because you never see, you never hear, you never get the exchanges between Aslan and someone when Aslan is having to sort of like chastise or reprove them.
That's right.
And you almost don't even get them even when Aslan is giving them counsel or guidance or anything. You don't get invited into the internal life of someone else.
That's right.
And there's something really important about that.
That scene is so wonderful, because the children wake up and they see Aslan and Edmond walking together in the dewy grass. Does that remind you of any particular garden where
Yes.
God likes to walk in the coolness of the morning?
Yeah.
Right? It's just incredibly wonderful. And all that happens at the end of it is Aslan says, "Here is your brother, and there is no need to talk to him about what is past."
Now, Lucy and
Right.
Susan talk about at the end whether they should tell
Yeah.
Edmund what.
Oh,
what
that's
Yeah, that's
magnificent.
coming up. Yeah.
And, am
No,
I-
no, no. I think she was gonna find it. You're exactly right. Keep going, Bob. Keep going.
Keep going, keep going. I'm gonna get you there.
They're not certain that Edmund really knows the cost that he made. And then Lucy thinks, you know, she sees him when he recovers and recognizes him, and she says, "This is my brother. This is the guy I used to know before he had that first term in a boarding school, which clearly was very, very bad." And I think, I mean, she doesn't say it, but I think implied here is he got bullied and fagged by the older students in that tradition of the English public school, and was importing that into the home. So there are two different realities: the way public schools treat children and the way the home had always treated and respected Edmund.
And it's one of the themes that we saw last year with Christmas Carol, and that is that Scrooge starts off in one of these horrid schools. And this year, Edmund
Yes.
starts off in one of these horrid schools, and they both wind up pretty badly.
Yeah.
And so I think that the whole theme of this 2-year thing is quality education for everyone. Yeah. But it does, it humanizes Edmund,
It
right? Because
does.
it's like, oh, he's not like a Wooses or an Ettons,
Right.
Yeah.
right?
Right.
There's actually a reason why he is the way he is, and it actually kind of humanizes him. So.
It also gives him the capacity to be the just and
Yes.
to be very meditative about it. He's been all over both sides.
That's right.
And boy, is that a help in making judgment. It confuses judgment also.
Yeah.
He was a graver and quieter man than Peter. So me myself, I suspect that I don't know how, but he eventually knows what Aslan did for him.
I think
He somehow does.
Mhm.
And so Lewis makes a decision. I don't have to explain it. We don't have to put it into words. There's a transformation that sort of transcends easy summary or description. And yet Edmond fully comprehends it. And we don't have to try to describe it.
does that motivate him to attack the witch on his own and have the brilliance to
Yeah.
cut off her wand?
Yeah.
And when Lucy says he won the battle, he's
Yeah.
the hero of the battle. And I think he got spine there because he needs to pay his part
Yeah.
of the cost.
Remember that his name means protector.
Mhm.
And who better to
Yeah.
protect others from
Wow.
evil than one who has been entwined in it and must find their way out?
Oh,
Right.
I wonder, and again, this is an honest wondering, is he the only one of the four that has actually ever seen her use? Right, with the Christmas,
And
and so he
doesn't-
knows where the.
And doesn't become a stone
Right,
himself.
right.
Yeah.
He's right with the Christmas party, right? Maybe he's the one that knows where in a sense, the weakness lies.
Interesting,
And so
yeah.
he's the one that's
Yeah,
able to actually
yeah.
take care of her. Everyone else is trying to attack her.
Somehow also with Edmund's redemption, I love the scene in which Peter meets Aslan and confesses that he knows that he has a part to play. It kind of
Yes.
comes back to the humanizing of Edmund.
Absolutely.
Edmund is not this straw man of like wickedness and cruelty. He's a kid.
Right.
And when Peter stands in the presence of Aslan,
Mhm.
and this is where the brilliance of Aslan as a metaphor or a symbol for Christ, I think for me is so powerful, is that the words come tumbling out of Peter.
Mhm.
He knows that Edmund is actually the one under scrutiny in that moment because Edmund is the one who's being brought into the fold. And yet when Peter is standing there, he confesses, his confession tumbles out of him as well, that somehow it's going to come out of all of us. It's not just the bad people who did the bad things and they're so bad. It's also like we stand there and suddenly we can't help. There's like a compulsion to admit our own participation in the thing that was wrong too. And Peter does that. He's like, I was angry with him. And I think that helped to turn him into this as well.
And notice that it's anger, right? That anger is one of those emotions that masks things but that also becomes incredibly violent when others experience anger, when it's not in check,
Yeah.
right?
Right, because when the wolf, Maugrim, right, is attacking Susan in the tree, it's his anger that actually is the thing that is able to let Peter kill him, right? He doesn't just reach around and snap his throat, right?
That's right.
But he gets angry, right? And because he gets angry, then Peter can kill him. And so
Because
yet
he's
again,
howling
anger is a great.
instead of.
Right, yeah, anger is a
Fighting.
great theme in the book, I think.
Just for those who haven't read Rowan Williams' whole book, the quotation Father Casey was just talking about is that Aslan is an invention giving an imaginary answer to the question, what might Christ become like if there really were a world like Narnia? So there's back to whether we're reality or illusion or dream here. And he chose to be incarnate and die and rise again in that world as he has actually done in ours.
Mm.
So it's a very strange way to rethink both Christ and the kingdom that he addresses.
There's the judgment piece, because we're having this conversation in Advent, right? And we hear lots of language as Christ as judge. Aslan as Christ, as the Christ figure, comes back. Now it's not the final Advent, but it's this like the return of the King. And he comes and he is Savior and he is judge, because when Peter stands before him, it is not just so Aslan can like coach him on how to go like defeat the queen, though he does.
That's right.
he also, like I said, a confession comes tumbling out of him. He is standing in the presence of his judge and it is a merciful judge. It is a judge whose eyes, whose very breath is mercy and healing. And yet he is seen fully and completely and laid bare in the same way that Edmond is. And I know that we talk about the prophets talk about the great and terrible day with a capital D. We talk sometimes about the day of Christ's return and some other Christian traditions talk about it as a cataclysmic day of destruction and annihilation. But when I think of Christ as judge, I think about Aslan breathing on me, of me standing in Aslan's presence and him breathing on me, and my own, everything about me just comes out in complete, honest confession, and I am laid bare.
And he looks at you with those great unchanging eyes. Nothing, there's no sort of can't believe you did all that,
Yeah.
right? And then it seems to all of them that there's nothing, ultimately, there's nothing to be said. That ultimately, in the face of our judge, once it all comes out, it's just silence.
Yeah.
What is Aslan? I mean, unchanging eyes is not my image of him when he's in the eve of his own assassination, because he's very sad and lonely and lets Lucy and Susan touch his mane and go along with him. And Lucy can't figure out, quite why he's so sad, but she says, now here's my other note. Oh, here we go. I think she misdiagnoses the problem. I had to write all this out. It's so complicated. Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him or something dreadful that he's going to do. And I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. But I'd like to know what you all think he's sad about. He's not sad about his own death. So what is he sad about?
I think he's
maybe.
absolutely sad about his death.
Take this cup from me, is
I
what his
think
eyes
what
are
Lewis
saying.
is saying is this is really going to hurt. This isn't just and here is when we're layering on Christian theology, right? To say that Christ suffers and dies, but it's not painful, or he's cool with it the whole time, or he just
doesn't suffer.
He doesn't suffer, that somehow it is a suffering less death is antithetical to core Christian theology. And I think Lewis is trying to lay that on top of Aslan and say, because he's not going to dwell, right? And I think he kills Aslan in one sentence. And so he's not going to dwell on, he's not going to do the Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson style, with the flaying of Aslan. He's going to kill him in one sentence. So he has to sort of build this emotional depth, this deep emotional life within Aslan, which he portrays in his sadness.
It's the Via Dolorosa.
It's the Via Dolorosa. He's walking the way of the cross.
It's the Garden of Gethsemane.
It
Where
is.
Jesus was terrified
Yeah.
and troubled and sweating like great drops of blood and begging his friends to stay with him.
And here the girls do.
How slowly he walked, and in his great royal head, it drooped so that his nose nearly touched the grass. And presently he stumbled and gave a moan.
Yeah.
And that moan is, if it be your will, let this
Yeah.
cup pass from me.
Yeah.
And you're right, the girls, we get into the whole scene because they cannot go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. But
I love that. That is so worth catching.
Yes.
Because this is Lewis telling the story, which Bob said, he is imagining what if Christ was what if the story of the Gospels was played out in a fantasy fictional land? This is the whole premise of Narnia. He puts the whole story in a fantasy fictional land, and yet when it comes down to the Gethsemane scene, the girls can't go to sleep. They have to stay awake, and they feel this compulsion to go with him and to just touch, they just want to touch him. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
He knows his Bible.
Yes, that's right. They haven't been feasting at a Seder meal and had 7 cups of wine. Yes, yeah, true. Touche.
I'm not a theologian, but surely in Aslan's case, I feel that he's also sorry for the creation and for what has turned into. I don't think that his regret is so much I don't know, I don't feel it so much for himself as it is for his creation. And which gets me to the dark magic and the magic before time, because there are two different kinds of magic working here. And he's really not of the world's magic.
Indeed.
But he can, and again, I sort of wonder what you think about this first set of magic, because the White Queen knows the law and the line. She is coeval with the creation of this world, it says here. That's
Well-
changed in another book, but never mind. It is the truth for here. But then she has her law, and he must concede it. And that would be very sorrowful in a way. That isn't personal so much as creation. And then he invokes an even older law before creation. What is an older law before creation?
Well, in this moment, the law of love,
Love, yeah.
the law of love.
Absolutely.
If someone who is pure can take the place of a traitor,
Yeah.
then time starts to move backwards.
Did anyone else notice that she, when she's talking about that law, she cites the emperor?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you're on page 155, and you're going, who's the emperor?
Yeah.
Right? And in that question doesn't ever actually get answered. Because when you read the prequel, The Magician's Nephew, and you see the creation of Narnia, there's no discussion of the emperor there. So there's some level of Trinitarianism that's
It
at
is.
play here, but it's not
page is
strictly
that?
stated.
What page is it?
155. You at least know the magic which the emperor put into Narnia at the very beginning. Right?
Well, where is it? Maybe it's not this book, I can't remember. But Aslan is referred to as the son of
The son, it's in this one. He's the son of
hang
the
on, hang
emperor
on.
over the sea.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
It-
So there is very much a hint of
13.
Trinitarianism in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not fully unpacked.
No, it's
because
not.
Lewis wants to walk right up to the edge of like creating a full, rich, complicated, layered, textured allegory. He wants to sort of walk right. He wants to go up to that edge and then walk back a little bit because he still wants to have a children's story,
Mhm.
right? So he
You have
doesn't
to-
unpack that.
You have to find the spirit in the breathing over the
Indeed.
frozen statues, right? That
absolutely.
then enlivens them and brings them.
And
to
him
life.
singing it into existence.
Of
at the
course, of
beginning.
course, of
It's so
course.
wonderful. I love that he breathed. The Aslan's breath is just like one of my favorite things in this whole thing, that he goes around breathing on people. I just absolutely think that that is just the most marvelous thing. Maybe of the whole story.
Yeah.
Like my favorite part.
Well, it's John, right? The Gospel of John, when he comes
Absolutely.
back, the first thing he does is breathe
Breathe
on the
on them.
disciples.
But somehow, like a big lion breathing on me just is like better than like,
Jesus?
I don't know. Like, I don't know, did you brush Jesus? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But there's something whimsical,
Sure,
and magical.
Sure,
about it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
At the end of Dickens's Christmas books, there's always a party or dance or celebration, often with alcohol involved, like the wedding in the Bible. And here, it seems to me that the richness of what is available in life, even though it means maybe these other things as well, is quickly recaptured in the film when the four kids take their thrones, which we don't actually see.
Yes.
So we are left, I think, with a sense that this kingdom is cleared for the Pevensies' lifetime.
Yeah.
And well cleared. And in fact, they revert to medieval language.
I know.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the bit where I'm like, Lewis.
yeah.
He's trying to beat Tolkien, I think.
Yeah, right.
I can't help but think there's a concession there to
Right.
some of that.
Yeah, yeah, an inside joke.
It is.
Yeah.
Had a fit because Lewis involved both northern kinds of sprites and southern kinds of sprites.
And had all these inconsistencies that weren't addressed. So
Yeah.
one of the things that Rowan Williams talks about when he's talking about their friendship and how critical Tolkien was of this is like, the beavers put this feast before the children when they first arrive. And there's no explanation at all of how ham and potatoes and
Right,
milk
right.
and all these other things
Where they get it?
could come to the table in the middle of this forever winter. And Rowan Williams says brilliantly, Tolkien would have given you an entire book of horticulture in a frozen world.
With like 3 songs.
Correct. In a different language.
Yes. Yes.
So, yeah. But you know what happens that I love? That before you get to that, before you get to the throne ceremony, right? And the great Imperial March music playing in the back of your head from Star Wars. And I know I'm confusing things, but before you get to that, and before anyone else knows that Aslan is alive again, what you get is Aslan and the 2 girls and this mad chase that begins. And it says, he stood and his eyes were very bright and his limbs were quivering and he's lashing himself with his tail. He leaps over their heads and laughing, though she didn't know why, she scrambles up to reach him and they chase round and round on the hilltop, hopelessly out of their reach he was. And they would almost catch his tail. And he says, and never before was there such a romp anywhere in Narnia. And Lucy can't decide whether she's playing with a thunderstorm or a kitten, right? And what a wonderful thought about what it's like to be in the presence of God, that is, that you're chasing and you want to catch and you can't quite catch, but God is right there sort of pulling you along and you're laughing. And it's just this scene of an immense joy, right? Immense joy.
And every subsequent book, the children's encounters with Aslan is instantaneous eruption of joy. I mean, there is solemnity to it because Aslan lays all things bare, but they're always absolutely delight. Like their hearts are warmed. It's profound. And Lewis pulls that through.
Yeah. There's
we
a
have a-
question.
And it happens again when they go to the Queen's Castle. Not quite the same way.
Right.
But as Aslan
Yes.
is breathing
Yeah.
on all of the statues and they come alive, there's dancing.
Yeah.
There's playfulness, there's joy, there's singing, there's all of this is happening. They're going to all the corners, they're throwing open the windows, the doors, searching, and almost as people are being redeemed here in this and coming to life again, every time someone new comes to life, there's another dance, there's another joy.
So I want to back us up and say, sorry, really quickly, in response to that the first flower that Edmond sees as they are beginning to move on the sleigh that's getting stuck, and it can't go any further. And he starts to see flowers and there's a whole bouquet that pop up. But the very first flower that he sees is a little yellow flower called a celandine. And in the Victorian language of flowers, celandines signal joys to come. Isn't that lovely? So anyway.
So with that point, with the point Jared made about, and for those who are at home and couldn't hear him, that the eruption of joy in Aslan's presence and the frolic, the thunderclap and the kitten that happens when Aslan is liberating the statues and breathing on them and they're coming back to life. I want you to think about that every time you look at the icon of the resurrection, where the risen Christ is reaching down and grabbing onto and pulling out from the dead, right? I want you to picture that as that is happening, okay? So like this image of the freeing those who have been frozen in stone.
Right.
Who have become enslaved in death.
What is it? The harrowing of hell.
The harrowing of hell.
Yeah.
And
that makes-
as Christ liberates them, we have this moment, and in iconography, you have to sort of, right, you're invited to see through it into a prayer. So see through it into that eruption of joy and life and the thunderclap and the tenderness of God, of that hand reaching out.
And I'm sorry, just one more. But the castle scene is so good, right? Because you remember the very first thing, right? Isn't the very first thing that he unfreezes the lion?
Yes.
And the lion says over and over, did you hear what he said? Us lions, us lions, us lions will go on the front. And then at least he went on saying this until Aslan had loaded him up with 3 dwarves, 1 dryad, 2 rabbits, and a hedgehog. That steadied him a bit. But I love that steadied him a bit because it's salvation, but it's also judgment.
Yeah.
And it's a judgment not of like he's a bad lion or he's evil or he's prideful. But it's not like for me at least, that language of it that steadied him a bit. Because, right, it's not just like complete like sorrow,
Yeah.
or it's not just complete joy. Because either one of those makes you unsteady. There's a steadiness with the lion. And it also has to go back to anger, right? The whole notion of losing one's temper. Again, it's not in the book. I'm just telling you this. But losing one's temper, right? Because what a temper does with a knife is that it makes it strong. And when you lose your temper, it's not that you get angry, you lose your temper, and that is you become weak, you become fragile, right? But that's not what happens with the lion.
So what we're saying, I think, is that the dream is made by the book into the reality we take away.
Absolutely.
The joy is there for us to imagine and visit at some time when we walk through into that world.
This is exactly, Amy asked me last night, what are you gonna talk about? I said, I have no idea. I'll just listen. I'll just listen to them. She says, no, if you had to say something. And it was this. This is what I would have said, but Bob brought it up so beautifully that I don't really. How many people actually, and again, this isn't a quiz. You're not gonna get points or get points. How many people actually read the book? Beautiful. Okay. Now then, you read the book, right? And again, I can't do it here. I can't do it here. It's like a magic trick. I can't do it here. But imagine when you were reading the book, all right? Again, there's no momentum here. But imagine when you were reading the book and you came to this part. So these kings and queens entered the thicket, and before they had gone a score of paces, they all remembered that the thing they had seen was called a lamppost. And before they had gone 20 more, they noticed that they were making their way not through branches, but through coats. And next moment, they all came tumbling out of the wardrobe door into the empty room, and they were no longer kings and queens in their hunting array, but just Peter, Susan, Edmond, and Lucy in their old clothes. And it was the same day and the same, I mean, I'm getting chills on the top of my head just reading this, right? It was the same day and the same hour of the day that they had all gone into the wardrobe to hide, and Mrs. McCready and the visitors were still talking in the back. Do you remember when you were reading that and you saw that you only had like 2 more pages going? And you know that feeling you get when you're reading and you know you're coming to the end, and suddenly there's a transition where you're like there, and yet you're lying on the bed, or you're sitting in the chair, or you're at the desk. You know that, right? I can see, you know what that is? That's the wardrobe. It's not just that, and again, I'm not gonna say you're wrong. I'm not going to say you're wrong, but you mentioned, you just said, and it was a throwaway things before, that we were witnesses to what happened in Narnia. We weren't witnesses. We were actually there. We were there in the book experiencing these things. That's the reason why you cry when Aslan is, I mean, you cry, your eyes well up, because you're there, you're actually experiencing it, and you come to the end and you come out of the wardrobe and you get that feeling that they get, I'm sure. It's because this is literature. It's not just that we do this allegory, it's that this story actually affects us.
It's real.
It's real.
It's real. It's real.
And you know how you know it's real? Because you get back to the other side of the wardrobe and the professor says the same thing Aslan says.
That's right.
Once a king of Narnia, always a king of Narnia. How does the professor know how to say that? He wasn't there.
Because he has an MDiv or a PhD.
It's Dr. Professor to you. Right?
Yeah,
Right? That it's,
absolutely.
there's something of it comes with them in
Absolutely.
that. Once you're there, you're always there. Once you're baptized, once a child of God, you're always a child of God.
Once you've been there.
And so what do you
You're
do?
always-
Well, it'll happen when you're not looking. So
Mhm.
keep your eyes
Oh,
open.
And just think of what we were able to do here to make that world real with the kids and the teachers. And it was a beautiful thing to walk into. I mean, with Aslan at the end,
That's right.
it was, and any of us that read the book said, this is not real. This is right. This is right.
Final thoughts? Because we're out of time.
Well, do we need to say anymore?
No. I guess I want to read one last sentence from the book to close on. One day you'll see him and another you won't. He doesn't like being tied down. And of course, he has other countries to attend to. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in. Only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not like a tame lion.
Amen.
And with that thought, thank you, friends.
This was wonderful.
Oh, that was lovely.
Oh,
Awesome.
we don't know what we're gonna do next year. Give us a little while.
So next year, the Sorcerer's Stone. Oh my gosh.
Perhaps.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. What a joy this was. I don't know what I'm gonna call you about next year, but I'm gonna probably call you. So y'all just brace yourselves.
Of
I'll
course.
try to stay within your 100-year time.